the questions and comments from all of you participating. So just by a little bit of background, I am a quantitative health services and policy researcher by training. I'm originally from Michigan in the States and have been in Canada now for 26 years, something like that. And I think I'm going to take like a slightly different perspective, the kind of research I'll be talking about and the kind of research that we support. Also, for full disclosure, I should say that I am the principal investigator of the large data initiative that Michelle made reference to in her talk. So, what I wanted to talk about is data as a public good. And really, this is about public and patient involvement in this kind of data-intensive research, I'll call it for sure. So just to, some disclosures, I don't have any conflicts of interest to declare, and I do want to acknowledge my partners on this research funded by CIHR. We're based at UBC. I definitely benefit from my involvement with the support unit in the Academic Health Sciences Network, and then specifically with Mike Burgess and Kieran O'Doherty, who you'll see pictures of later in this, and my other colleagues there. Okay, so what do I want to do? I want to talk about this area of data-intensive research, and really what I mean by that is just the use of really a lot of different kinds of data sets and really a lot of population-based data for research. So this would be data that might, as Mia was describing, cover the entire population of British Columbia, or perhaps even the entire population of Canada. I want to talk a little bit about the implications, I think, of where this whole world of data and research and ambitions are going. A little reference to a consensus statement that has been written in this area, some work that we've been doing in British Columbia involving the public and citizens discussions, and a bit about transparency, the kind of transparency we think is needed. And so, data. So you're going to say that these are some of the things we keep hearing about, right? Data is an asset that we should take advantage of. Data is the new oil. This is the one that always confuses me because I don't think we should be that happy with the old oil. So whether that's the new one, I don't know. And data is really this engine that's going to drive economic development, social development, and so on. So we have this kind of vision of, we live in a very data-oriented society. So we have all these sources of information for researchers, lots of opportunity, and you combine this new world of data with computing power, and of course this is part of the reason we have all this data. Computers have gotten so powerful, it means that everything that we collect is stored in digital form. I mean, all of you with smartphones, that's an awful lot of data that's sitting on that little device, and maybe more of it than you realize is swirling around and being used by companies and so on. Although anybody who's done a Google search, gone shopping for shoes, and then done anything else on the internet, you realize you get chased by shoes everywhere you go. Right? So finally, you have to search for something else and then shoes all the time. Anyway, so this creates a huge opportunity, and so this is researchers super happy with all these great new things that we might be able to do, which really feeds a whole lot of scientific potential and innovation that we can achieve in all of this area. So we need to think about the rewards and the risks that are involved and I think we're entering an unknown world. I feel like a lot of times this is like television in my parents' generation. My mom didn't have television growing up. We did when I was a kid, and so that was really unnerving to her to understand how to negotiate this box and our attention to it. And that's kind of what we're dealing with data. We don't know what all of this means. There are a lot of potential implications, and I think we need to think through those together. So what are some of the potential rewards of using all this data in research? So one is just I'm a nerd when it comes to sort of this stuff. So it's kind of exciting to think about, we can actually combine, data from shopping habits with information on people's health outcomes, with their experiences of care, and maybe actually find something, an insight or some kind of new something that help people make decisions that are going to support the goals that they have in their life. That's exciting. Scientific discovery in general is really, really exciting for researchers, but that's a bit inward focusing. Then there's the fact that research can lead to innovations in healthcare products, in healthcare delivery systems, in all sorts of other domains of prevention and that sort of thing. We can have a better understanding of all the things around us and the way that the world we live in, whether it's exposures in the social world or exposures in the healthcare system, our social connections, all of those things affect our health. And with a whole lot of data, we can better understand how that happens, and with that information, make changes to influence things in the way we wish. And then I always include, this is Clyde Hertzman, for anybody who might remember him. He was this amazing researcher, unfortunately passed away 5 years ago, but he was really, really focused on early childhood and the idea that your experiences in early life carry an imprint for the rest of your life. And, I mean, Michelle described a very particular experience in early childhood that's carried forward, but all of our experiences shape who we are, and better understanding resilience and that sort of thing can help us make some different decisions perhaps. So those are all the rewards. There's an awful lot of good that can come with the use of data. But there's some risks as well. And these I think we need to talk about a little bit more than we have been to this point. This never shows up. I don't understand why. So this is a Mac thing. So this is supposed to be a picture of all the different data sets that we might hook together. So early childhood experience, education, health, workplace experiences, all of those sorts of things. And the part of the risk comes in when we start connecting genomic information and all these different data sets. And what the risk I'm trying to think through on this is, we make a big deal in the research world about de-identified data and the protection of privacy. We're going to do things in a way that we can't ever say. We can say that here's an experience of a person in society, but we could never say that's me, right? But I think when we link all of these different data sets together, and you know something about your birth, where you went to school, where you lived over time, what your healthcare diagnoses are, your educational attainment, where you're working, is pretty comprehensive. In the genomics world, they would call that high-dimensional data. So we know an awful lot of different things about you. I think telling people in that context that we've de-identified the data or anonymized it is not, it's just not true. Or at least it's very difficult to guarantee that's what's happening. If you add genomics into that, all bets are off. I mean, I think in the genomics world, there's acceptance now that genomes are identifying. If you have the right information, if you can link to other things, you can identify people. I don't want this to scare anybody into thinking we shouldn't use the data. I just think it means we need to think differently about how we govern the use of these data. And the other thing is, when you add all of these things together, we're not talking about just being able to identify individuals. We can identify family members because of a similar genomic profile. We can identify communities, again, because there might be a similar profile, or maybe because of what we're studying, it just says there's a particular subpopulation. It could be a geographic community, it could be an ethnic community, it could be any number of things. So this to me means that we need a different conversation. This cannot always boil down to individual consent, because there's wider implications of what we're trying to do. I think it also means we're not in Kansas anymore. I already said it from the States. I don't really love Kansas. So maybe that's okay. It's certainly more colorful on the right-hand side, but it's a different world. And it's not a world we fully understand. And so we need to think carefully about what we're doing. The other thing I would say in a digital world is that it's a bit of Pandora's box. So it used to be, if there was a problem with the medical chart information getting out, it was because somebody had put a chart in their trunk and their car was stolen, and it's, somebody found it. So that's one person saw one person's chart. That's not a good thing at all. But in the world we live in now, if there's a breach, if there's a problem, and there's an electronic link of information, it's out. and you're not getting it back. And so that's why I use Pandora's box here, because once the lid comes open, you could call it, you can't stuff the genie back in the bottle, you can't put the thing back in the box, right? Damage is done, and to a certain extent can't be undone. So I think the risks in that sense are higher. Now, for those of you who know the story of Pandora's box, I use this particularly because what's left in the box is hope. And so I really do want to come at this with that we just need a better way to deal with this, not that we shouldn't think that the things are possible, that all the rewards are not achievable. The other thing I like to talk about is that I feel sometimes, and I would be one of these people guilty of this because I'm a quantitative researcher, we think we can do a study and find an answer. And I think in this realm we're talking about, that's not the case. Because this is a values-based decision, or what I would call a normative decision. This is a collective enterprise, so there's not a right way or wrong way to think about what research we should be doing under what circumstances with what data. It really depends, and we can't pull a rabbit out of a hat. We can't say there's a study to be done and then we'll know what to do. What we have to do is acknowledge that these are values-based decisions and come together collectively to try to figure out how we're going to run the use of data in this new world. So there's been a little bit of background work that's been done in this area internationally, and a paper that was written that's available here. This is open access, anybody can go to it. And it's a consensus statement on public involvement and engagement with data-intensive research. And I want to draw attention, I think we already had a little discussion about language. The language here is very specifically about public and patient involvement. And the involvement there, for those who know this scale, you can have people, the public involved anywhere from, we're just giving you some messages, to you actually get to influence policy and decision making. And so involvement is at that greater end of the scale there. And so the key premise here that's in this paper is that the public should not be characterized as a problem to be overcome, but a key part of the solution to establish socially beneficial data-intensive health research for all. So this is very much about with the public, because this is about public value and socially relevant outcomes. So more specifically, what we need to raise, and this is like a global consensus statement, and yes, it did involve a number of patients in development of this consensus conference. So these are things that we think need to be done. So raising awareness, enabling people to participate in research and data governance, as you've heard from other speakers this morning. Bridging the gap between data users and people about whom the data relate, because of course when you're doing the kind of research I often do, it's very holistic. You haven't collected data from patients, you're not running a trial, you're just using already collected data to do research. Bridging the gap between members of the public and the data about them, because this can actually help the public understand what we know at a broader scale, and establishing a social license for peer and future practices. So this is I would say, a counterpart, not a replacement for, but a counterpart to the idea that individual consent would be community consent, social license, all of those terms kind of meaning the same sort of thing. So one of the ways that we have started going about doing this is actually, we have funding from CIHR, our Canadian Institutes for Health Research, our national funding agency, to have a deliberation with the public about appropriate uses of data for data-intensive research. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I mean by deliberation. So the method that we use here was developed by Karen O'Doherty on the left, Mike Burgess on the right. And what it involves is spending 4 days with a group of about 25 people. So this is 2 weekends that are separated in time by 2 weeks. So the idea here is you have these 25 people, you give them some background information, and then you have to let them talk with each other in both large and small groups. And the ideas here are not to come to consensus, it's to have people talk with passion about what they feel is right, and provide some reasoning behind their statements, and really to figure out how it is that in a diverse society, where we will never always agree on everything, how we can create rules that we all can live with. So it's quite different from a focus group, and the imperative is not to make the public into any research experts or privacy experts. It's really to provide that social perspective. So we have, what we did, we ran this last April, and there's information on the Pop Data website that describes all of this. We recruited 25 people from across British Columbia with a range of experience and profile, younger, older, rural, urban, all sorts of things like that. We developed an information booklet and deliberation questions, recruited speakers, and then all of the other things that go along with planning, hotel, travel, and all that sort of thing. This is a front page of the booklet. Like I said, this is online, so it gave a bit of background. What is research? How does ethics fit in? What kind of data are we talking about? That sort of thing. And then at the first day of the deliberation, we had a series of speakers, and these were very, very carefully collected or selected speakers. We had a data steward, so somebody who's in charge of governing a request for access to data, a researcher, somebody who's a privacy advocate who actually talked about the dangers of surveillance society, that sort of thing. So this is meant to be very balanced information, and we told the speakers, the speakers were not individually expected to be balanced. They were supposed to bring forward their passionate perspective on this. Our responsibility was to provide balance overall across all the speakers. We had a person living with a disability who was a fierce advocate for research. We had a member of an Indigenous community talk about some of the more negative things that can come when data are used to stereotype or to be against communities. So the speakers helped to set, in addition to the booklet we provided, helped to set a context that gave people enough information to have deliberation. And then we used the questions in the deliberation to talk about, okay, so when is this kind of research okay? What rules should we have surrounding it? Who should have access to what data under what circumstance? And we asked them to make recommendations in their words, and then they voted on recommendations. And then on the last day, we brought a policy panel together to receive the recommendations and to have a little bit of dialogue about this. So this is what it looked like. We recorded everything. We had people sitting in a U-shaped discussion. You can imagine they got to know each other pretty well by the end of the time. And here's their recommendations. We have 19 recommendations overall. And I'm just going to summarize them quite quickly. So one of them is that a set of recommendations were around the idea of governance of linked data set. Everybody said that this was quite a consensus that research is good, but it gets a little more complex if we talk about private enterprise being involved. So research is good, but it's not just full stop. There's always some context or some boundaries around that. The review process and security of the data is really, really important. So is there scientific review? Are we sure this is a good study? Is there good ethics involved with the study? Has it been reviewed? Are we going to have continuous protection of the data before, during, and after the study is being done? There's responsibilities both for data stewards and researchers in all of this. The essential role of data stewards that this public group came to was, who are these people? What's their job description? Do they have some common training? Is there accreditation? Do they make the same decisions in the same circumstances? Which is really interesting because the answer to all of those things is no. We don't have a common job description. We don't train data stewards. We just name them and let them go about their job, which is not an easy job. Researchers, of course, also have responsibilities, and that included in this public recommendation, they have a responsibility to the communities that they study. And there's a really, really strong expectation of transparency. So one aspect of transparency, this is not from the deliberation, this is something we've been following up since then, is that we need, I think, better communication to the public about what data is available, what's being done with the data. A lot of the data that we work with is not consented. It comes because you're, as the data that Mia described, it comes because you're receiving services within that healthcare system. And so we have allowances to use those data for research. research, but that doesn't mean we don't have an obligation still to be transparent about what we're doing. And so what we have started talking about, this is in another paper that will be out soon in that same journal I referenced earlier, is that we should have model text. There should be some expectations around even just letting people know what's happening. And we describe this as notches on the dial. Something that could show people like how sensitive is this? How risky is this that we're doing? And if it's more risky, then we probably have more expectations about why it is that we're doing what we're doing, who said it was okay, who are the researchers, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so in summary, we're not in Kansas anymore. And we're not going back, right? This is the new world we live in. Research is good. Governance of research, data use, data collection is all really, really important. Data stewards are critical. They perform a really, really foundational role, and probably we could do a lot better to support them in that role. The public needs to be involved in decisions about what happens in this space, and transparency is expected, but it's not entirely clear what that means, and we need to do a lot more to make sure that we've actually achieved that. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.